This video is brought to you by Webroot. The Surface Pro is a great computer. I've been using it for about 3 to 4 months now. It's lightweight, it's built really well, it's very powerful, and this iteration here is literally the blueprint for 2-in-1 tablets right now. But it's not perfect. The lack of ports, the lack of USB-C, and Thunderbolt 3 in 2018 leaves a little bit more to be desired, so a company named Eve Tech asked the community, what more would you want out of the Surface Pro? Then it became a crowdsourced project, and about a year later, there was a little bit of delays here and there, but now it's ready to come to market. It has more features and even comes at a lower price point. So we're gonna look at both of them today and find out, is cheaper actually better? If you look at them side by side, they are the same form factor, and definitely the Surface was the inspiration for the EV, but they both have detachable keyboards, and they are a tablet on their own. They both have the kickstand, and they both have the keyboard here. There are a few differences though. The EV has a little bit better key travel, a little bit thicker here, and it has some cool things with the keyboard. The EV keyboard has some whimsical stuff on it, like the backspace key is the oops key, and the V is replaced by the EV logo. Some people might like that and some people might not like it, but I think it's kind of cool because it gives it a little bit of personalization. And the biggest difference for me is the backlighting, where the Surface Pro's backlighting is very subtle, hard to see in the daytime, but it's not like that with the EV. And you can also change the colors. There's RGB lighting in there, so just hitting function and V button at the same time, it will give you a change in cycle of color, so it'll give you a little bit of personalization there, which I like. The trackpad on both are about the same size, and they both use Windows Precision drivers, but I did notice that the EV's trackpad is not as responsive as the one on the Surface Pros, so keep that in mind, but I guess you could just use a mouse. Even though they are the same form factor and they look very similar, you do get some different build materials. You get aluminum here on the EV, while you get a magnesium alloy on the Surface Pro. I like the way they both look, but I kind of prefer the black stealth look of the EV. But one thing is, it does attract a ton of fingerprints. So I do have a Dbrand skin on here. This is the Marble Edition. And I also have the Black Dragon on here now since I decided to switch it. I kind of like Black Dragon, but both of them work. So link in the description below if you want to check one of these out if you have an EV. But the one thing that I did notice was the quality of the hinge. Now there's no problems with the hinge on the EV, but this bottom part is really, really sharp. So if you're gonna take this and actually change it on the table, you can kind of hear that scraping here because it is very, very sharp. And the mechanism is not as smooth as the one on the Surface Pro. In terms of portability, they're both about the same, but the EV is a little bit thicker because it does have a higher watt-hour battery, so you're gonna get some better battery life out of the EV. Okay, so the two big attractions to the EV is the port selection and the price. On the Surface Pro, it's very limited. You only get one USB-A and a mini display port, so that's not very much. But on the EV, it's a different story because you get two USB-A ports, one on each side, and you get two USB-C ports, which is great. And one of them is a Thunderbolt 3 port, so you can hook up external GPUs, which is a big deal if you want to game on this, and faster storage. You can output monitors to it, so that's really convenient and definitely more fitting for 2018. I forgot they do both have a headphone jack, but the difference here is the way that you unlock the device, or for security, is that the EV has a fingerprint scanner on the power button here on the right side. It works really well, it's fast and responsive, but if I had to call it, I really prefer Windows Hello on the Surface Pro because I don't even have to touch it. You just turn it on, it scans your face, and you're right in there. So they both work well, but just my personal preference, I like the Windows Hello method of face unlocking. The second thing is probably the most important thing, and that's pricing, and we'll get into that in just a second. Before we get into the details, I want to thank our sponsor for this video, Webroot. The internet is a scary place, and cybersecurity is a big deal, and you need to protect yourself. The numbers can be pretty scary. The stats say that 45% of all consumers have been a victim of a cybercrime sometime in their lifetime. And I have to admit, it's happened to me twice. I've gotten my credit card information stolen, And even though I got all my money back, it was a painstaking process and it was a wake-up call for me to be more careful on the internet. This is where Webroot comes in. It's a very easy to install and lightweight software that is going to protect you from these types of scams and malicious websites. It's really fast. It scanned my Surface Pro in less than 30 seconds. What I like about Webroot is that it's cloud-based, so it's being constantly updated all the time, and your machine is not susceptible to these old vulnerabilities, and there's new protections being added all the time without you even thinking about it. So if I end up visiting one of these malicious sites, Webroot will block it to protect me. They have a huge cloud database of known attacks, and it also protects and encrypts your passwords, usernames, and credit card numbers. Once again, since it's cloud-based, it's really fast, it does not bog down your system, and it also works really well with Windows Defender, so it's that second layer of security and protection, and it's that peace of mind. So if you're interested, I'm gonna leave a link down below for you. And it also works great on the Mac, so don't forget about these new vulnerabilities that are now coming up on the Mac. So make sure you check that link down below, download it, and let me know what you think. Okay, so let's talk about pricing. So the biggest thing that you need to know about the EV is if you purchase any model, you're gonna end up getting the keyboard and the pen included in the box, where on the Surface Pro, you're gonna have to buy those separately. So you're gonna have to add on about $250 to the cost to get the keyboard and the pen. But Microsoft's shaking things up a little bit because on the lower end now, you can get a Core i5 model, not an M series processor, but a Core i5 with 4 gigs of RAM and 128 gigabyte SSD for about $800, where the EV starts at the Core M3 model for about $960. But if you add the pen and all that stuff and the keyboard, you're almost approximately at the right price. So when it comes to the lower end and the mid tier, it doesn't look as different when it comes to the gap of the price. But when you go to the higher end i7 models, that's where you really start to save. And you can save up to about $1,000 buying the same spec configuration. But it is really nice that though the entry level on the EV comes with 8 gigabytes of RAM versus 4 gigabytes of RAM. So it's kind of a big deal since you can upgrade after the fact. But there is probably one major thing you should know about the EV is that all of their models, including their i7, i5, are running Y series processors, while the Surface is running U series processors. So there is some difference here in performance. So I didn't know how much difference there would be, so I ran some benchmarks, and I saw that the CPU performance is quite a bit higher on the Surface Pro. You know, say what you will about benchmarks, but every benchmark that I ran, the Surface Pro scored higher. So on everyday use, you're probably not gonna see much difference. So if you're using it for a lot of Word documentation and for business, which these things are kind of intended for, then you probably won't see a huge performance gain. But if you're dabbling into some Lightroom or working with some raw photography and things like that, then you're gonna see a difference here on the Surface Pro. So that's something that I wanted to note. And of course, these are not made for gaming, so I wanted to try some light games like Rocket League. So I played Rocket League on the Surface Pro, and on the highest settings, it was definitely playable. The frame rates were acceptable, and it was no problem at all with the integrated GPU. But I tried those same settings here on the EV, and it was almost unplayable, very choppy, and the frame rates weren't good, and I would not suggest it without dropping it down to the quality. So it was pretty impressive on how different these two are, but the higher clock speed and the faster processor on the Surface Pro will kind of help with that. But you can't forget about the Thunderbolt 3 capability of the EV, so that it opens up things for eGPU. So if you had a powerful GPU, you could probably game on this. So if you want to see that test, I don't have an eGPU right now, but I could get one and test it out. So if you guys are interested, I'd be happy to buy one and try this out. So leave a comment down below if you want to see that video. I almost forgot about the displays, but I probably would have been killed on the video if I didn't mention it. They both have the same size, same aspect ratio, but technically the EV has a higher resolution display. You can see it a little bit, but it's not a huge difference here. It's a sharp IGZO panel. I think that the off-angle axis viewing is a little bit better on the EV, but the Pixel Sense display is also very, very nice on the Surface Pro. So I don't think you'll be disappointed with either of these, but I think if I had to make a choice, I think the EVs looks a little bit better contrast as well. But the EV is actually not factory calibrated because this is an earlier version of the EV. So when I get my final unit in, I will be able to make a better decision about that, but both great displays. As I mentioned before, they both have support for the pen. So the EVs comes with it, and it's basically like the older generation Surface Pro pen, where there is a little bit of lag and there's a little bit of delay. So if you're gonna use this for art, it might not be the best thing, where the new Surface pen is very good, and it's definitely better than the older pen. So if you're gonna do some art, I would suggest buying the newer pen or going with the Surface Pro. But if you're interested in the EV, that might not matter, because that pen is supported here on the EV. So you just need to get a better pen, but that does add an extra $100 on to your purchase. But that's good that it does support the new Surface pen. So to round things up, they both have cameras on the front and back. Both aren't stellar in quality at all, but they're made for video conferencing and just quick pictures if you need it. So that's nice to have them there. And they both have micro SD cards underneath the kickstand. So that's a nice thing if you need to expand your storage a little bit. So I want to know from you guys, is the EV a better Surface Pro? Honestly, I have to admit, I think it's a better deal all across the board, because you get the keyboard included, you get the pen included, you get a lot more ports. But the processor decision is a little bit of a mix-up for me, because I wish they would have went with the U-series processors to give it a little bit better performance on the EV side. But I think if you're using it for productivity and you don't really need that power, then I don't think it's really much of an issue, and I think the EV is a better value. If you care about my opinion at all, I like the Surface Pro's design better. I like the build quality. It feels better in the hand. It's less fingerprinty, and I like the attention to detail. If you look at the ventilation, just that precision, it looks really, really nice. And the hinge mechanism is better. It's smoother. I just feel like the execution is a little bit more polished here. But I do feel like the EV is a better consumer choice overall, but this is not considering that the Surface is an ecosystem. So if you're working in education or in business where the Surface Hub is being used and things like that, I'm not even taking that into consideration. But for the general public, I feel like that you get a better deal with the EV if you're willing to sacrifice a little bit on the performance side. Personally, I am glad that companies like EV are pushing forward stuff like this, because as consumers, that means we win. We have more choice, and I feel like what we say are getting implemented into products like EV, and that's just great for the future of tech. Both of the products will be linked down below if you are interested. So subscribe to the channel if you want to see more cool videos like this, and thumbs up if you want to see more PC videos on this channel. I really had a good time making this, and I will see you guys in the next one.